Well, good morning. Welcome to the Alaska Independent Democratic Coalition press availability. We're down to the last few days. I'm Alaska Independent Democratic leader Chris Tuck. Joining me today is Representative Harriet Drummond, representing Spenard in Midtown area, also serving on the Education Committee and Community Regional Affairs. And then down from Fairbanks, we have Representative Adam Wool, who is serving on Health and Social Services and on the Energy Committee. Visiting this week, we have the Greater Alaska Schools. They're going to be arriving. Coming up later on today, the Governor's Medicaid Expansion Reform Bill is being considered in the House Finance Committee. And as a coalition, we do want to make this legislation make it through the process in the last 11, 12 days that we have of session. We also have Anchorage municipal elections that are taking place. And on that ballot is school bonds. And so we want to make sure that we give a committed, lasting opportunities to our public education. This last 2 weeks of session, we do have the Senate wrapped up the FY16 operating budget. Many of the cuts that we've seen happen in that body is just simply unacceptable, and I hope that some of it gets reversed in the conference committee. There's a broken promise with our public employees, taking away the collective bargaining agreement provisions, and a broken promise to supporting public education by dipping down into the base student allocation. The 24-hour rule could be waived very soon. The bill is going to come back, the operating bill is going to come back to us, and we will probably most likely reject it, and then shortly after that, once we have our conference committee members selected, we go into 24-hour rule, meaning that bills are going to be moving very fast, and we don't have to give as much notice to the public as previously. Friday afternoon, we will have a hearing on House Bill 6. That's my bill to allow veteran preference in hiring personnel. And with that, I'll turn it over to Representative Harriet Drummond.
Thank you, Representative Tuck. As you know, the Senate passed an operating budget that includes a 4% reduction in the base student allocation to Alaska's public schools. This is something we've worked on for decades to get that base student allocation up to where it needed to be. The $5,880 BSA, as determined by last year's House Bill 278, will be cut by about $200. They're funding the BSA at approximately 96%. The Anchorage School District School Board had a contentious meeting last night. They're looking at an enormous menu of potential cuts. They'll be losing approximately $30 million and be forced to cut about 300 jobs, in addition to the 600 they've already cut in the last few years. They're going to lose middle school and preschool. They're talking about outsourcing sports. It is not a pretty picture. The Kenai Peninsula Borough School District could lose about $8 million and be forced to cut 100 jobs. Fairbanks would be losing about 55 jobs, I think Representative Wool thought. And the cut put forward by the Senate is a clear violation of the promise that was made last year when this body worked overtime to pass HB 278. That wasn't something I supported last year because it was not the right amount of funding for schools, and there were a lot of policy issues that we in the Democratic minority did not appreciate. But they're not even keeping that promise. They are reneging on that promise, and I'm, however, confident that the House minority, as well as the majority, will not allow this irresponsible cut to the BSA to go forward once the operating budget returns to this side and is taken up by the conference committee. In House Education this week, we heard HB 44. That's one of the 4 Aaron's Law bills that has been introduced this year by 4 representatives, two female senators and 2 female representatives, one from each party in each house. And this particular version also includes teen dating violence education in the schools, as well as child sexual assault alert education. And with the horrible statistics that we have in this state that makes us #1 in the nation in child sexual assault, it is appalling to me that we have not been able to move any of these bills this session. Committee meetings have been canceled, adjourned early, and we're only now, in the last 17 days, hearing an Aaron's Law bill. This is embarrassing. Our colleague, Garen Tarr, brought forward an Aaron's Law bill last year, brought Aaron Guerin up here, excuse me, I don't remember her name, Erin Marin, up here to talk to people, and made it all the way through the House, and then it got caught up in the last minute session shenanigans on the Senate side. We need this bill, and we need it today. Adam?
All right. Adam?
Thank you. Representative Adam Wolf from District 5 in Fairbanks. A few things are on our radar up there. First and foremost is I want to thank Senator Pete Kelly from Fairbanks because of the cuts he proposed to education. My inbox is just blowing up right now. So there's a lot of email coming in about the cuts. Already the Fairbanks School District was looking at potentially $11 million shortfall. First it was $7 million, and then without the one-time funding, it was $11 million. They were looking at about 60, 70 positions cut. Now this latest round, it's down to, I think, $17 million deficit and another 55 positions. So it's devastating, absolutely devastating to the school district in Fairbanks. I, having kids in that school district, am very concerned. Class size, losing teachers, losing programs, so it's totally unacceptable. So a lot of people are expressing that via email, phone calls, etc. So hopefully we can resolve that very shortly. All the cuts, not just the last round, but we have to get education back up. Yes, I know there's a deficit. That's been repeated many, many times, but education is not something we should skimp on. Other things in Fairbanks, the energy bill, House Bill 105, did get out of resources on Monday, and that is great news. It got energy resources, now it's going to finance, and we need some movement on this. People in Fairbanks are very concerned about energy prices. Oil is down right now, which is great. We have a little respite, but it's not going to stay down forever. So we need some help on the energy. We need some motion as far as people taking action towards resolving the natural gas situation or any kind of energy situation in Fairbanks. As was reported last week, Fairbanks lost about 1,500 people in last year's census, and people are leaving, and we need to stop that flow. Medicaid expansion is the other big thing that I was involved with in the HES committee. It got out of HES. It's in finance, I think, today, and hopefully that'll be on the floor soon. Medicaid expansion is good for so many reasons. For one, it'll inject a lot of money into the state very quickly. It'll inject jobs, which we need. It will help a lot of people who currently fall between the gap and don't have insurance coverage. These are hardworking people. I know several people that are working and couldn't qualify for the federal health subsidies, and also made too much money to get covered by Medicaid. So it is really important, and these people need coverage. To not have insurance is a very bad thing, and they need health coverage, and it'd be good for the economy, it'd be good for the state. Recently I read a report that talked about 3 states that have recently adopted Medicaid expansion with 2015 numbers, very current numbers. Washington, Connecticut, I think New Mexico, they all reported a net gain to their state economy. So I think Alaska needs it, and it's time, so hopefully that'll be on the floor pretty soon. Those are the 3 major things that are concerning those in the interior and in the state of Alaska. So with that, I'll let Chris take the middle stand, and we'll answer questions.
All right. Well, in our coalition, we still want to make sure that we have a lasting commitment to public education, making sure that we have affordable, accessible health care, making sure that we have safer communities, and that we continue to provide opportunities for Alaskans in these tough times of low oil prices. And we'll open up to questions.
Rhonda McBride, KTVA, Channel 11. In the last press conference that we were at, the Senate Majority's presser, they talked about new revenue numbers that are even worse than that. Our budget deficit for this current fiscal year could approach $4 billion. So how does that affect your thinking on how we move forward with funding for schools, everything else?
Well, fortunately, we've been able to put a lot of our resources into savings accounts. And for times like this, we knew that prices wouldn't be as high as they have been. And we've also been concerned about more oil production. And so with declining oil production and with a sudden drop in oil prices, yes, we are faced with deficits. However, we have been wise about putting some of those resources into savings for days like today.
Alexander Gutierrez, APRN. Speaking of savings, with the cuts to education, with Medicaid moving, what are your priorities for the CBR vote?
Our priorities are going to make a lasting commitment to public education. And we're going to, and making sure that we keep our promise, at least keep our promise. We would like to actually inflation-proof public education, because that's one of the most important investments that we can make during tough times with the economy. And so we got to look at how everything comes about. We still don't know what's happening with the capital budget. I think that generally the public doesn't know what's going on with the capital budget either. And when we see these last-minute backdoor, cuts to public education where people don't get a chance to weigh in, leaving the Senate, and now that we're in conference committee, we're just going to have to see how everything shapes up. So seeing how things happen with FY15, the supplemental budget, see what's happening with the current operating budget, and then see how things shape up with the capital.
I mean, but can you support a draw on savings with these cuts in place at all?
Almost, I think that we're probably going to see a draw into our constitutional budget reserve, because we just can't cut ourselves down far enough.
Right, but can you all support that with these cuts?
With these, no, not necessarily with these cuts. Like we said, we'd like to restore our promise to the public education system.
So is that your way of telling Mike Chenault that to get the Democratic votes he needs to dip into the CBR, he's going to have to raise education spending? That's me demonstrating what our coalition priorities are, and that is me answering the question that was directed towards what we would like to see at the end of session.
The question was actually about the CBR and not the end of session.
But to get out of here, we're going to have to take a draw on our savings, and we will have to come to agreement on what our budgets are going to look like leaving session. That's the one priority that we have as legislatures, is appropriations.
So when you say you're going to have to come to agreement, that means they can't do it without some of your guys?
Possibly. I mean, there are ways to get around the constitutional budget reserve vote if they want to start pulling stuff out of the earnings reserve. And we've already seen a huge transfer from the Education Endowment Fund. They took the $1.2 billion, so that makes that now going in the general fund for available for appropriation. So that's still yet to be determined. We're going to be patiently and cautiously and watching to see what the majorities do when it comes down to getting out of here in the final days.
Rhonda McBride, KTVA. This morning, the Senate Majority Leader said that they don't see any way but to lower the capital budget much lower than what the governor set out, $150 million. What do you think there's room for?
And I didn't catch the press availability, but you were saying that they said that they can't go any much lower than the governor's?
No, they said that it's going to go lower. They haven't said how much. What are your thoughts on that?
Well, it all depends on what we're spending the money on and what we're cutting from. There are some necessary infrastructure projects that we need to continue investing in. We do not want to tank the economy. We don't want to overnight put us into a tailspin. So we're just going to have to watch it. Again, we don't see everything that's going to come out with the capital until we see a latest CS version, and then from the Senate, then we can see where we need to maneuver from there.
So what about the cuts that were made in the operating budget to the LIO lease, as a way to save money? You're talking about putting the economy in a tailspin, and I know Democrats have been critical about how much was spent on the remodeling of the LIO and the lease that was negotiated. How do you feel about that?
Well, and that's what's happening. In these tough times, we're seeing a lot of broken promises. I wish that we had never entered into that contract in the first place. That's doubling the cost of what we could have had if we had listened to Linda Menard when she was head of Ledge Council and bought the Unical building. And then we'd have ownership of that building. So these are just some unwise decisions that we have to get ourselves untangled from with this budget deficit. And unfortunately, when we had flow of money, the leadership, Republican leadership, was spending it all over the places. How many mega projects can you fund all simultaneously, rather than going precept upon precept and making it priorities and using the money wisely?
You've got a bond election going on in Anchorage right now. Can you give us any insight into what's happening with the debt reimbursement bill in Juneau?
The debt reimbursement bill left the floor on, what was it, on Thursday night. So that's going to be transmitted over to the governor for the governor's signature. The effective date clause did not pass. So I think the governor has all sorts of time now to sign that, because it does become retroactive all the way to January 1st. So there's no hurry now to sign that.
Alexander Gutierrez, APRN. Representative Drummond, your Death with Dignity bill is going to be heard later this week. I was just wondering if you might be able to speak to why you introduced it in the first place.
Sure. I didn't have a family member that needed to take advantage of such a law. I have been listening to stories of many people, and I was especially touched by the story of Brittany Maynard, a California woman who was diagnosed with brain cancer last year, I believe just before she got married, or just after she got married. And she actually had to move to Oregon when she decided that she would need to take advantage of their Death with Dignity bill that's been in place for about 20 years. And that's why I brought it forward. I thought about Alaskans who are so far from family and having to move to Oregon and uprooting their families to do something like this, or to be alone in Oregon, would be absolutely horrible. And I think Alaskans need to have an option like this. And my inbox has been filling with many letters of support for House Bill 99, and it will be heard on Thursday afternoon in Health and Social Services.
On another social issue, the Attorney General has filed an amicus brief on ban of gay marriages, and the governor didn't check him from doing that, despite previous promises. What are your thoughts on this?
Well, there's some mixed feelings. I know there's members of our caucus that are upset with that, but then we also have an Attorney General that's his oath of obligation is to uphold the Constitution of the state of Alaska. And right now the Constitution says that marriage is between one man and one woman. So it is his duty, no matter what his beliefs are, it is his duty to protect Alaska's Constitution.
But does he have, does that involve an amicus brief that, filing that?
And it may. You have to ask the Attorney General on how far does he need to defend the Constitution. It doesn't necessarily make us, well, I guess it does make us part of the lawsuit, but it's not like he's going to be making arguments or anything. The amicus brief allows him to follow and track, and I guess eventually make comments if he needs to.
Actually, following up on that point, just yes or no for all of you, do you support the action that he took?
No, I don't.
And I do support his action of upholding the Constitution of the state of Alaska, his oath of obligation.
I think he was within his professional obligation to uphold the Alaskan Constitution. I don't know that decision resonates with a lot of the people, and I think that issue is decided by the Supreme Court, and so.
And we got to be careful, because we want to have separation of powers from the executive branch, from the legislative branch, the judiciary branch, and we don't want to politicize the judiciary branch in any way.
You all have been critical of Attorney General actions in the past when the state has gone for lawsuits that you don't think that it has a chance of winning. What's different in this case?
I don't know. Well, I can't say that we've made decisions based on whether a lawsuit can win or not. I know that when we look at legislation like legislation that was passed yesterday of accepting federal lands when it's unconstitutional, and very unlikely that we're going to be successful, I don't see us needing to spend the money to do that. It's a good statement to make. That's the reason why I said that I think it would be better if a resolution was passed. But just even the state constitution, because we have our compact that we signed with the federal government releasing those authorities in those conditions. So we have the Alaska state constitution that may not be upheld, and then also the U.S. constitution. So I think two resolutions, one asking the governor to file a lawsuit if we think that we need to claim those lands through legal matters, and then another one urging the federal government to release those lands to us.
I have to say, I kind of hope that the feds don't give us all that land. We don't have the money to manage the lands that we have now. How are we going to manage another 100 million acres of land? It makes no sense. It makes no sense to me. Not in this budget situation that we're in.
And personally, I'd like to have the legacy wells cleaned up before they gave those to us.
I get the impression from what you're saying that you don't feel that these cuts that are being made are absolutely necessary, that there's room in the budget reserves to cushion us. But on the other hand, I've heard you say, Chris, Representative Tuck, that you think that a lot of times these budget cuts are an excuse for the majority to cut what they don't like. Do you believe this is the case here with the recent cuts?
Well, I will say that the budget does demonstrate your values. And what we've seen the Senate do in public education, we see that the Senate Republican leadership doesn't value public education as we do. We see that as very important. Those societies that invest in higher education were always the most advanced societies throughout history. And so I think that's a clear definition of where their values are. And we're here to tell you now, we're going to try to do everything we can to not only keep our promise, but make a lasting commitment to public education.
The majority has cut every preschool program. They have cut K-12 education substantially, and they've cut the university substantially. How are we ever going to recover all of those professionals that are going to leave the state because there is no work for them? Our goal is not to tank the economy with the budgets that will leave this building here in a few weeks. And I'm certainly going to fight for restoring education cuts. The majority doesn't like preschool. They don't, however, accept the fact that 60% of Alaska's families have two working parents and kids that need preschool or daycare. There are thousands of daycare positions and preschool positions that go unfilled because the programs are simply unavailable. And to further reduce the availability of preschool in the most needy communities in the state is going to be devastating to our K-12 education. Preschool helps kids take advantage of the money that we're going to spend on them once they get to kindergarten. And I'm not at all impressed with cutting preschool.
I think perhaps this last round of cuts also was to sort of move the goalpost down so that if we restore this last batch of cuts, it brings the, it feels like we're gaining something when already we're looking at the loss of the one-time funding. So by moving it down even further, we'll regain that to feel like we're back to where we should be, but we're not. And so I think maybe it's partly a bargaining action, but we really can't forget where we were when we started, which was already behind where we should be, because education is really important, and that's something that shouldn't be cut.
We're also witnessing the breakdown in the public process. The Senate held no hearings on the operating budget, and as we said earlier, there's not a lot of discussion going on about the capital budget. The House held hours and hours of hearings and evening meetings to allow the public to weigh in, and the public understands the cuts that need to be made. However, on the Senate side, this is why our email inboxes are filling up, is because the public was not given an opportunity to weigh in on what the Senate did late last week.
And I just want to add, there's going to be a lot of last-minute maneuvering. There's going to be a lot of dialogue that's going to take place. Our one duty as a legislature is to appropriate money, and where you appropriate money is where your values lie.
And still on the education cuts, I mentioned earlier Fairbanks lost 1,500 residents in the last year. If we start cutting schools back and lower the quality of education, you're going to see more people leave. Because one of the main reasons people will stay in a community is they feel like their kids are getting a good education. That works for Anchorage or everywhere in the state. So I think people will leave if they think the schools are subpar. And I mean, people value their kids, and they value their kids' education more than they do a road or a bridge.
And when we have a $10 million a day deficit, and you look at the $47.5 million that were cut, that's 5 days of deficit. But look at the impacts that that has on our education system overall. It's huge in comparison to the savings. Yeah.
Legislative Finance Director David Teal said that you can't cut your way out of this or to a sustainable budget. Does anybody disagree with that?
No, I think the numbers are pretty clear. I mean, it's such a huge deficit that cutting every public employee won't get us even halfway.
So in that case, how do you get to a sustainable budget?
We're going to have to look at the resources that the state of Alaska has, and it has to be an overall fiscal picture. One of the things that we've always been saying is we got to make sure that we get a fair share from our natural resources and make sure that benefits Alaskans. And until we fully look at that, I don't think we should be reaching into the pockets of working Alaskans.
In both budget processes, the minority offered hundreds of millions of dollars in savings by working on reversing the tax credits to the oil companies, and the majority ignored all those possibilities. They're now taking it out of school children and preschoolers.
And we see that coming out of seniors as well. And that's pretty much the theme that we see coming out of the majorities is hold the oil industry harmless. Let's increase fees here and there for Alaskans to try to bridge that gap. And I think that if we had another stab at the referendum on Senate Bill 21, Alaskan voters would probably vote a different way. But I got to remind everybody that was a referendum, that was an initiative, so we don't have a 2-year moratorium to not look at that. I know that Senator Wielechowski and Representative Les Garrett dropped a bill to set a floor so that we're not at least we're not paying out the $700 million in tax credits without any revenues coming in. So I think Alaskans are upset that we're paying the industry effectively this year. And when you look at the amendment that we try to introduce we'll pay $500 million this year, we'll just defer paying $200 million to next year. That was killed by the majority. So that's the situation that we're in right now. It's a difference of philosophy. Hold the oil industry harmless, but let's grab it from everyone else, where we're like, let's hold everyone else harmless. Let's get our fair share.
And I just wanted to, not to get too hung up on this, but I just wanted to follow up on a comment you made earlier about the gay marriage amicus brief and separations of powers with the judiciary. This isn't a judiciary action. This is an executive branch action. And just given how progressive your caucus has been historically on the issue of gay marriage, is there any sort of reluctance to criticize the executive on this action?
I don't think this was the governor's decision. I think this was the attorney general's decision, and I think there is a separation of powers with the Department of Law. I mean, I know the Department of Law does fall underneath the governor. He does appoint that person. We have it's unique here in Alaska. We don't elect that person, but I still think it's Alaska's constitution intent to have a separation of powers.
And some governors do run the Department of Law from the third floor. This governor says he's not. So there is, I believe the governor when he says that he didn't support this particular action and that the Attorney General acted on his own.
Any further questions? Well, thank you for joining us. Things are going to get lively in the last 12 days of session, and we hope that we get the people's work done and that we come out with a budget that we can all agree on and feel comfortable with. So thank you for being here.